The stars had always been silent watchers of Earth. For countless ages, they had looked down on oceans, mountains, forests, and cities without a sound. But far beyond the reach of human eyes, another species had been watching too. These were not friendly observers. They were patient, calculating, and endlessly curious. They were the aliens who believed they understood everything about humanity. For generations, they had studied Earth from a distance. Their technology was so advanced that no telescope on Earth could ever see their ships, no radar could ever sense their presence. Hidden in the deep dark of space, they recorded everything. They observed wars and peace, victories and defeats, inventions and mistakes. To them, humans were fascinating but simple creatures. They saw humans build weapons. They saw them fight among themselves. They saw nations rise and fall. And every time the aliens took notes, believing they were adding another piece to a puzzle they would one day solve. In their eyes, humans were nothing more than fragile animals who had learned to build tools. Clever, yes, but predictable. Strong in numbers, but weak alone. Brave in words, but often fearful in actions. The aliens had one goal: control. And for that, they needed a plan. Not just any plan, but what they called the perfect plan. They spent centuries shaping it. Every human behavior was charted, every response tested through subtle experiments. When storms raged, they studied how people helped or ignored each other. When wars broke out, they measured how quickly humans turned against one another. When diseases spread, they tracked how fear traveled faster than reason. To the aliens, these were not tragedies. They were data. They were lessons. And with each lesson, their perfect plan grew stronger. It began with simple assumptions. Humans were emotional. They reacted quickly but thought slowly. They could be distracted by hope, broken by fear, and controlled by power. The aliens believed that if they used technology greater than anything on Earth, humans would surrender without question. No weapon could stop them. No army could challenge them. No government could resist them. The perfect plan was designed with precision. First, they would block human communication, making sure leaders could not coordinate their defense. Then they would disable electricity across entire regions, turning cities into dark, silent places. Next, they would display their ships in the skies, huge and terrifying, to create panic before they even attacked. Finally, when fear had reached its peak, they would strike with flawless timing, hitting military bases, airports, and satellites in orbit. In their minds, humans would crumble like sand castles before a rising tide. The aliens took pride in their preparation. They did not underestimate weapons or numbers. They measured everything. They ran endless simulations, testing every possible scenario. If humans resisted in one way, they had an answer. If humans resisted in another way, they had a second answer. The perfect plan had no holes, or so they believed. But there was something they did not understand, something no simulation could ever capture, something no amount of data could measure. It was the very thing they dismissed as weakness, the human mind. From their cold distance in space, they saw humans as numbers, patterns, and charts. They never understood that behind those numbers were stories. Behind the patterns were dreams. Behind the charts were individuals who thought in ways that no alien could predict. To the aliens, imagination was chaos, and chaos had no value. They believed only in logic, only in control, only in the certainty of their perfect plan. And yet Earth was not made of certainty. Earth was made of surprises. While the aliens prepared, life on Earth went on as usual. People walked in crowded markets, children played in fields, friends laughed in cafes, and workers built new machines without knowing eyes from the stars were watching. Humanity lived with its flaws, its conflicts, its arguments, its endless chasing of goals, but also with a quiet strength that no outsider could see. The aliens, however, thought they saw everything. They were confident, even arrogant about their success. Their leaders declared, "The humans are ready for harvesting. Their spirit will break quickly. Their cities will fall without resistance. The perfect plan guarantees it." Their followers nodded in agreement. To them, it was already over before it began. They had calculated every step, predicted every reaction, and prepared every answer. Still, hidden deep in the human spirit, something waited. It was not a weapon, not an army, not even a plan. It was the unpredictable spark that had always guided humanity. The same spark that once made people sail into unknown oceans, climb mountains they had never seen before, or build machines they did not yet understand. That spark had carried humanity through darkness again and again. And it would soon be the one thing the aliens had forgotten to prepare for. As the day of the invasion drew near, the aliens celebrated among themselves. "The Earth will bow," they said. "The humans will yield." Their confidence was absolute. They looked at their maps of Earth, their lists of targets, and their endless data. To them, the outcome was already decided. They thought the future was written in their favor. But the truth of the universe is this: no plan is perfect, no matter how carefully made. And the greatest mistakes are born not from weakness, but from pride. Far below on Earth, ordinary people were unaware of the storm coming from the skies. Some were working, some were dreaming, some were struggling through their daily lives. None of them knew that their very existence, their very way of thinking, would soon challenge the perfect plan of a powerful enemy. The aliens had prepared for weapons, for strategies, for every kind of resistance they could imagine. But what they did not see was that humanity's greatest weapon was not one that could be built or measured or predicted. It was the mind, the ability to dream, to create, to imagine something new in the face of despair. The perfect plan was almost ready. The aliens waited like hunters at the edge of the forest, confident that their prey would soon be caught. But in that forest, a fire of imagination was waiting to burn. The invasion would begin soon. And when it did, the aliens would learn a lesson they had never expected. The perfect plan was strong, but the human mind was stronger. The night before it began was strangely calm. Cities glowed with their usual lights. People walked through streets carrying groceries. Buses rolled down crowded roads, and families prepared for another ordinary day. No one looked up at the sky, long enough to notice the faint shimmer of movement among the stars. No one guessed that far above, a force was preparing to change everything. The aliens had waited for centuries, but now their moment had come. The perfect plan was ready. Every calculation, every strategy, every possible reaction from humans had been tested in their simulations. Their leaders had given the command. The first strike would show the humans how powerless they really were. It began without sound, without warning. In the middle of the night, cities across the planet suddenly went dark. Streetlights blinked off, televisions turned to black, and even hospital machines fell silent. People woke in confusion, thinking at first it was just another power cut. In some places, laughter echoed as families lit candles and joked about old times without electricity. But this time, the darkness was not ordinary. It was everywhere. Entire countries swallowed by silence at once. Airports found their control towers frozen. Pilots spoke into radios, but no answer came back. Ships on oceans lost navigation. Phones stopped working, computers died, and cars stalled in the middle of highways. The world, built so carefully on machines, suddenly felt like it had returned to an earlier age. At first, people were puzzled. Some stayed calm, lighting lanterns or sitting quietly, waiting for power to return. But as hours passed, unease grew. Why was no one giving answers? Why were no leaders speaking? Radios that once brought news carried only static. In the quiet, fear crept in. Then came the sky. High above, enormous shapes appeared. At first, they looked like shadows against the stars, too large and too slow to be planes. People pointed upward, their mouths open in disbelief. Some thought it was a trick, some thought it was new technology being tested, but deep down, many felt the truth. They were not from Earth. The alien ships revealed themselves not with thunder, but with silence. They glided over cities, smooth and endless, casting shadows that stretched across streets and fields. Their surfaces shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the dim glow of the moon. For the first time in human history, people across the world stared at the same sight, united by a single feeling, awe mixed with fear. The first strike was not about destruction. It was about control. The aliens wanted humans to feel small, helpless, and powerless before they even fought back. And it worked. Crowds gathered in silence, staring upward. Some dropped to their knees, some whispered prayers, and others froze, as if time itself had stopped. But among the silence, a question began to grow. What do they want? In homes lit only by candles, families argued softly. Some believed the visitors had come to help, to offer wisdom or gifts. Others said no. They had come to take, to rule, to end what humanity had built. Fear split into two paths, hope and dread. The aliens observed this carefully. Their sensors recorded every reaction, every heartbeat, every fearful whisper. To them, it was confirmation of what they already believed. Humans were predictable. Confusion, then fear, then surrender. The perfect plan was working. Hours passed, and still no voice came from the alien ships. Not a word, not a sign, not a single clue about their purpose. This silence was intentional. The aliens knew the human mind struggled most when it had no answers. Panic would rise faster if no one explained what was happening. By the second day, the world was trembling. Governments tried to respond, but their leaders could not speak to one another. Communication systems were still dead. Armies could not move. Planes could not fly, and satellites floated useless in orbit. The perfect plan had cut the nerves of human civilization. The body still lived, but it could not move. People began to gather in open spaces, searching for strength in numbers. Some held signs asking for peace. Some raised banners of resistance, shouting that humanity would never bow. Yet no matter how loud their voices were, the ships above remained still, watching without reaction. In small villages, the effect was quieter, but just as heavy. Farmers stared at the sky while working in their fields. Children asked questions their parents could not answer. Old men and women sat on porches, whispering stories of stars and myths, trying to find meaning in what they saw. On the third day, the aliens finally moved. One ship lowered slowly toward a great city. It did not fire weapons, but instead released a sound, not a word, but a deep hum that vibrated in the bones of everyone who heard it. People clutched their ears, some dropping to their knees. Lights flickered briefly before dying again. The hum was not designed to kill. It was designed to remind humans that they were not in control anymore. Across the world, similar displays began. In one place, a giant beam of light cut across the sky, brighter than the sun, but leaving no heat. In another, an entire ocean lit, up as if glowing from beneath. Everywhere, the aliens showed power without violence, strength without words. They wanted the world to understand. Resistance was pointless. For many, fear turned into despair. If these beings could control light, power, and even the oceans, what chance did humanity have? Some whispered of surrender, others of hiding, but a few, just a few, felt something else rising inside them. Not surrender, not despair, but determination. In the shadows of quiet homes, in the corners of powerless cities, a different kind of thought began to grow. People realized that the aliens expected fear, expected panic, expected collapse. But what if they gave them something else? What if humanity answered not with fear, but with creativity, courage, and unity? The aliens had planned for weapons. They had planned for armies. They had planned for governments. But they had not planned for the unpredictable strength of ordinary people. A mechanic repairing broken radios in secret. A teacher gathering children to keep their hope alive. A farmer who refused to abandon his fields. Neighbors sharing food with strangers. All of these quiet acts of defiance were invisible to the aliens. Yet they were real, and they were spreading. The first strike had begun, but its effect was not as perfect as the aliens believed. Yes, fear was real. Yes, confusion was everywhere. But beneath it all, the human mind was working, turning, refusing to accept defeat. And in that hidden resistance, in that unmeasured courage, the true battle was only beginning. The alien leaders sat in their silent ships, studying the planet below. By their measures, the first strike had been a success. The power grids were down, the machines were quiet, the governments cut off from one another. The perfect plan was unfolding as predicted. To them, the humans had no way forward. But what the aliens did not understand was that human strength was never only in machines. It was in something far harder to measure, the mind. And the human mind was not always logical, not always predictable. It could be fragile at times, yet at other times it could surprise even itself with creativity and stubbornness. In the cities, people were struggling. Food was becoming harder to find, and clean water was no longer guaranteed. Without phones and computers, families could not speak to loved ones in other towns. Some wept, some prayed, some shouted in anger. To the aliens watching, it looked like the first stages of surrender. But within these struggles, small sparks of resistance were forming. A group of neighbors gathered in one street, sharing food from their homes so no one would go hungry. In another place, a teacher continued to meet children every morning, teaching them from memory so they would not forget the power of learning. Farmers returned to the land, planting seeds by hand instead of using broken machines. These actions seemed small, but they gave people hope. And hope, once it begins to grow, is hard to stop. The aliens noticed these things, but they misread them. They thought humans were simply trying to survive until they finally gave up. What they could not understand was that these small acts of survival were not weakness. They were signs of defiance. On the fourth day after the first strike, something unexpected happened. In one village, a group of people lit torches and began to sing. The song was old, one they had learned from grandparents. Their voices rose into the night sky, clear and strong. The aliens watched with their instruments, recording the sound, but they could not find the purpose. Singing did not produce food or water. Singing did not repair machines. To them, it was useless. But to humans, the song meant something powerful. It was a way of saying, "We are still here. We are still us. We are not broken." The sound carried across the fields, and more voices joined in. It was not just a song. It was a shield, a way of holding on to identity when everything else had been stripped away. Elsewhere, others responded in stranger ways. Some people painted symbols on walls using ash or dirt, as if to declare that their voices would not be erased. Some children began playing games in the empty streets, laughing so loudly that their joy itself became a kind of resistance. One man told endless stories to a crowd at night, inventing wild tales about heroes and stars, keeping everyone's imagination alive. The aliens saw this but grew frustrated. Their models had not predicted it. By their logic, fear should have led to silence. Hopelessness should have led to surrender. Instead, humans were inventing new ways to feel alive, even in the middle of despair. One alien advisor suggested another strike, something stronger, something final to break human spirit completely. But the leaders hesitated. Their plan had always been to control without unnecessary destruction. They wanted humans to fold by themselves, to see their own weakness and give in. Yet now they began to wonder, were humans truly as weak as they believed? The truth was, humans had a gift that no machine could measure, the ability to act against reason. A person who had lost everything might still stand up and laugh. Someone with no chance of winning might still fight. And someone who was afraid might still run toward danger instead of away from it. The aliens did not understand this, because their own culture had long abandoned unpredictability. To them, order and control were everything. To humans, chaos was not just a problem. Sometimes it was a weapon. One evening, in a darkened city, a group of young people climbed to the top of a building. They carried no weapons, only pieces of broken mirrors. When the alien ships passed overhead, they raised the mirrors and reflected the faint light of the moon back toward the sky. From below, it looked like stars had come alive again. People on the streets stopped and stared. For the first time in days, the sky seemed full of light. The aliens, scanning from above, saw the flashes and grew uneasy. Was it a signal? Was it a weapon? They could not tell. In truth, it was neither. It was only creativity, only play. But that was exactly why it was powerful. It reminded the humans watching that even without power, they still had imagination. And imagination was something no alien machine could shut down. The unpredictability of the human mind began to spread like wildfire. People started to improvise, in every corner of the world. Some figured out how to build simple radios again using scraps, passing messages through static-filled air. Others turned bicycles into generators to power small lights. In villages, people began to tell each other that maybe the aliens were not as strong as they seemed, because if they were, why had they not already taken over completely? The aliens listened, watched, and calculated. Yet with every new, unpredictable act, their confidence weakened. They had prepared for weapons, for strategies, for governments and armies. They had not prepared for laughter in the dark, for songs in empty streets, for children drawing pictures of victory before it had even happened. By the end of the week, the aliens realized something they had never expected. The first strike had not broken humanity. It had awakened something else, something far more difficult to defeat. The human mind, unpredictable and wild, had turned fear into creativity, despair into stubbornness, and silence into voices of defiance. And as the aliens floated above in their vast, silent ships, a new thought began to trouble them. Perhaps they had underestimated the very thing that made humans human. The first strike had shown power. The unpredictable mind was beginning to show something greater, the kind of strength that no plan could predict, no strategy could contain, and no machine could control. The aliens had prepared for every threat they could imagine, but now they were beginning to face the one thing they had never truly understood: the mystery of human resilience. And deep below their ships, in the hearts of ordinary people, the seeds of resistance were quietly taking root. The days after the first strike stretched on like an endless test. The skies were still guarded by silent alien ships, and the ground still carried the weight of fear. Power remained gone in most places. Cities were shadows of what they had once been, and yet something had shifted. The aliens had expected humanity to break, but instead they saw the opposite. They saw people adapting, holding on, and creating new ways to survive. It was frustrating to them, but they still believed time would eventually bend humans to their will. What the aliens did not see coming was the moment when survival would quietly turn into resistance. That moment, the turning point, did not come with guns or battles. It came with small sparks that, once lit, began to spread faster than the aliens could measure. In one town, a group of farmers gathered at dawn. Their machines had long since failed, but they had discovered an old trick, plowing with wooden tools pulled by animals. It was slower, harder, and exhausting, but it worked. By working together, they were able to grow enough food to feed not only themselves, but also neighbors in nearby villages. People started traveling to them, carrying seeds, sharing water, trading what little they had. From the outside, it was simply farming. To the aliens, it looked like harmless activity. But to humans, it was proof that life could continue, even without the modern systems that had been destroyed. And proof always gives courage. Elsewhere, in a quiet neighborhood of broken houses, a group of children gathered with sticks and chalk. They began to draw strange symbols on the streets, circles, lines, and stars. To the aliens' eyes, it looked like nothing, maybe even nonsense. But to the children and the people watching them, those drawings became a kind of map, a reminder that they were still capable of creating meaning. Sometimes they pretended the drawings were secret codes, signals to one another that said, "We are still strong. We are not done yet." Adults who saw this laughed for the first time in days, realizing that even children could find ways to defy fear. One evening in a crowded city, a woman stood in the middle of the square with nothing but her voice. She began to speak loudly, not with anger, but with hope. She told people that they had lived through storms, through hunger, through wars before, and they could live through this too. People stopped to listen. More gathered. Soon hundreds of eyes were on her, and instead of silence there was applause. The aliens, recording from above, tried to analyze her words. They thought speeches were only useful if they gave direct instructions. They did not understand that sometimes words themselves can be weapons, powerful enough to turn fear into determination. Slowly, small groups across the world began to organize. Not armies, not governments, just neighbors, families, and strangers finding each other. They shared food, built fires together, repaired bicycles and carts to carry supplies, and whispered ideas late into the night. At first, it was only survival. But little by little, these gatherings became something larger. They became networks of trust. The aliens noticed people moving more, gathering more, sharing more. But when they tried to predict the patterns, nothing made sense. The movements did not follow logic, did not obey the rules of supply and demand or power and control. That was because the real engine behind these movements was not strategy. It was emotion. Humans were choosing hope over despair, unity over isolation, courage over fear. The turning point grew sharper when a few humans found ways to rebuild broken communication tools. Old radios, dusty and forgotten, were fixed using scraps of wire, batteries from abandoned cars, and endless patience. The first time a faint human voice crackled across the air, it was like a spark in the dark. People listened, not just to information, but to proof. Somewhere out there, others were still alive, still resisting, still thinking. From city to city, village to village, whispers turned into voices, and voices turned into movements. People began sharing simple codes, short messages, even songs over the radio waves. A mother in one place could suddenly hear a farmer hundreds of miles away. A teacher could hear a stranger repeating the same hopeful words she had told her children earlier that day. For the first time since the invasion began, humans did not feel alone. And that feeling, connection, was dangerous to the aliens. The aliens had prepared for strength, for technology, for armies and weapons. They had not prepared for a force so invisible yet so powerful. Unity. They tried to jam the signals, to block the faint messages humans were sending. But every time they did, humans found another way. If the airwaves were blocked, they used flashing lights across hillsides. If the lights were stopped, they used songs in the night. If the songs were silenced, they wrote words on walls. This was the moment where the aliens realized something was slipping out of their control. It was no longer just survival. It was the rise of defiance. And then came the most unpredictable act of all. In one broken-down city where food was scarce and water dirty, hundreds of people gathered in silence. They looked up at the massive alien ship hovering above. No one shouted. No one threw stones. No one ran. They simply stood there, together, refusing to hide. The aliens scanned the crowd, confused. What were they doing? Why were they not afraid? Why did they stand so still, with steady eyes? The truth was simple. It was not about weapons or machines. It was about showing the invaders that fear was no longer their master. By standing together without words, they declared, "You cannot control our spirit." For the first time, the aliens hesitated. Their perfect plan, so carefully designed, was beginning to crumble. They had prepared for resistance of the body, but they had not prepared for resistance of the heart. They had believed humans would break when systems failed. Instead, humans were discovering strength they had forgotten they had. The turning point was not loud. It was not violent. It was quiet, steady, and human. It lived in the way neighbors shared bread, in the way children drew stars on broken streets, in the way voices traveled through static-filled radios, and in the way entire crowds chose courage over fear. And as this spirit spread, the aliens faced a truth they had never wanted to admit. The greatest power on this planet was not its machines, not its weapons, not even its armies. The greatest power was something far more unpredictable, the human will to endure, to create, and to stand together even when everything seemed lost. The world was still broken, the skies still filled with shadows, but for the first time, humanity felt something stronger than fear. They felt the beginning of a fight, not a fight of weapons, but a fight of spirit. The aliens had wanted control. Instead, they had awakened the very thing they feared most. A united humanity. The turning point had come, and nothing would ever be the same again. Years passed, but the memory of those days remained sharp in human hearts. The aliens had come with great confidence, believing they had planned for every possibility. They had studied Earth, its weapons, its technology, its leaders. They had expected resistance to be fierce at first, then to collapse under the weight of fear. But instead, they had faced something they could not measure or predict: the human mind, with all its strange unpredictability and strength. Even after the skies cleared and the alien ships finally withdrew, their shadow lingered for a long time. Cities still bore scars of destruction. Towers remained in ruins, streets cracked and empty in places where life had once been busy. Yet everywhere one looked, there were also signs of rebirth. Gardens sprouted between broken walls. Children's laughter returned to alleys that had once been silent. Families gathered again in squares where they had once stood trembling under alien eyes. The earth had been shaken, but it had not been silenced. The legacy left behind was not only about survival, it was about rediscovery. For too long before the invasion, humans had lived in fast rhythms, machines running, cities glowing, people moving quickly from one task to another. But when all that was stripped away, they remembered older strengths: how to grow food from the soil with their own hands, how to light a fire from simple sparks, how to repair broken things instead of always building new. The invasion forced them to return to basics, and in doing so, they discovered the hidden wealth inside themselves. Stories became the lifeblood of communities. Around fires and in rebuilt homes, people told tales of how they had endured, how they had resisted, how they had found hope in impossible times. Parents told children about the silent crowds who stood together beneath alien ships, refusing to bow. Travelers told villages about voices carried across the radio waves, uniting people who had never met. Farmers told of seeds planted in dry ground that grew against all odds, feeding hundreds. These stories were more than memories. They became lessons. lessons about courage, about unity, about the strange power of imagination that no invader could crush. Generations grew up hearing these tales, and in every story, one message shone brighter than all others. The mind is the greatest weapon humanity has ever held. It was not missiles or machines that turned the tide. It was the ability to think differently, to adapt, to dream, to imagine. Possibilities even in the darkest hours. In schools rebuilt from rubble, teachers no longer spoke only of history or science. They spoke of resilience. They taught children how their ancestors had faced something far greater than themselves and endured, not by fighting harder, but by thinking deeper. They explained that the strength of the human mind lay in its unpredictability. Where other creatures moved by instinct, humans could choose. They could laugh in sorrow. They could create in ruin. They could hope in despair. And that choice was their greatest legacy. The aliens had left, but the world they left behind was changed forever. Borders between nations seemed less important now. People who had once seen themselves as separate began to see themselves as part of something larger, a single human family. After all, when they had stood under the same skies and looked at the same ships above, no flag, no language, no difference had mattered. What had mattered was their shared will to survive. That memory was not forgotten. Communities began to build not only stronger cities but also stronger connections. Technology was rebuilt, yes, but this time with care. People asked themselves, what good is progress if we forget the power of unity? What use is speed if we forget patience? What worth is strength if we lose compassion? The invasion had burned these questions into human hearts, and the answers shaped the future. As time went on, humans began to write books, carve monuments, and create art that captured those days. Paintings showed silent crowds standing against alien ships. Statues depicted farmers with seeds in their hands, teachers with chalk, children drawing stars on broken streets. Songs were written about voices on radios, about hope carried through static, about the night when courage became louder than fear. None of these works were made to glorify war. Instead, they honored the quiet strength that had saved humanity. The legacy of the mind was not just about remembering the past. It was about preparing for the future. People understood that challenges would come again, maybe from Earth itself, maybe from the stars. But now they carried a deep confidence. They knew that whatever came, their greatest shield would not be found in steel or fire. It would be found in imagination, in unity, and in the unshakable will to endure. Some whispered that the aliens might return one day. Others believed they would never risk it again. But in truth, it no longer mattered. For if they did return, they would face not the broken, frightened humans they had once seen, but a species that had rediscovered its strength. And this time, there would be no doubt. The humans would be ready not with bigger weapons, but with sharper minds. Years later, children would sit with wide eyes as grandparents told them the stories once more. They would ask, what was it like when the ships were above us? And the elders would smile softly, saying, it was frightening, yes, but it was also the time when we remembered who we really are. They would explain how the invasion had stripped away illusions and revealed the truth. That the human spirit could never be chained, not by power, not by fear, not even by forces from beyond the stars. The children would listen, and then they would dream. Some would dream of becoming builders, making cities that could withstand any storm. Others would dream of becoming thinkers, writing new ideas that would carry humanity forward. And some would dream of reaching the stars, not in fear, but in curiosity, ready to meet whatever awaited them with open eyes and open minds. The invasion had begun as humanity's darkest hour, but in the end, it became a mirror, showing them their greatest light. The aliens had prepared for every threat they could imagine, but they had not prepared for the one that mattered most, the human mind. That was the legacy, not the ruins, not the scars, not the losses. The true legacy was the knowledge that no force in the universe could predict or control the wild, unpredictable, beautiful mind of a human being. And so, the story lived on. A story not of defeat, but of discovery. A story not of destruction, but of rebirth. A story not of fear, but of courage. A story that whispered to every generation that followed. Remember who you are. Remember what you carry. Remember the legacy of the mind, because as long as humanity remembered, there would never be chains strong enough to hold them again.